All right. So this is the rock, paper, scissors project. These are the walkthrough topics that I'm going to talk about here. And then after that, there is some AP specific stuff that will be quizzed on later on this week. The actual rock, paper, scissors project that you're expected to complete is below. You will be using TK Enter to create a rock, paper, scissors game. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, take all these topics. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to open up Replit and I'm going to paste them in here and we'll talk about it. I'll create a new file and I'm just going to use whatever name for it they have. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it once this opens. Okay. And I'll paste this in here. What I'll do is I'll comment this out with a block string. What this does is it just makes sure that the computer's actually not actually printing this out or trying to read it. And these are my topics. The first thing we're going to talk about are modules. We've used some common modules already, but I'm going to be discussing what libraries are and particularly modules. I'm also going to talk about tuples. Tuples are similar to lists, but there are differences, as well as dictionaries, similar to lists and tuples. We'll talk briefly about advanced flow control, how to pass multiple arguments into a function, how to work with parameters, and then also how to pass arguments twice into a function. So 7 things to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about are modules. Now, if you look at the rock, paper, scissors project, the first thing that is mentioned here are libraries, and libraries are modules. I've mentioned this before, and we've used modules before, but really a module is just a collection of code that someone wrote that you can now use. They packaged all that code up and saved it as something called a module, and you are able to import it and use it in your code to make your life a lot easier. Programmers like sharing things that they do, so that way it makes other people's jobs easier because one person can't do everything. So you can package things up into modules. Another name for a module is a library. So here it says a software library contains procedures that may be used in creating new programs. And in Python, they're called modules. Now, we've used modules already, and the way we've been able to call them and bring them up is by using the keyword import. And then we've used modules like random and tkinter and time, sys. I also put in there, there's a popular module called turtle, which allows you to draw things. But these are just some that came to the top of my head that we use. Now, I had someone ask me a couple weeks ago, they said, hey, is tkinter still Python? And the answer is yes. Tkinter is just a module that some programmer created and said, hey, you know what? I'm going to make it easier for other people to create GUIs. So we use that. We use the tkinter module. In this case right here, right, I just have an import random, and that imports the random module. If I typed in import time, right, I could call different functions within the time module, which use time. So we've used modules before, but I just wanted to reiterate what modules actually are. Okay, now I'm going to show you a quick list. Okay, we've created lists before, but let's say I create a list of several people in the class's birthdays. Yesterday was my daughter's birthday, and it was November 7th. Okay, someone shout out a birthday of theirs. Oh, wow. January 18th. That's close to my birthday. We'll do 2 more. March 20th and September 8th. Whoops. All right. All right, back to this now. So I have 4 birthdays in my list. Okay, the way I create a list was I called my list birthdays and I assigned it inside square brackets, not parentheses, not curly braces. So I'll make a note here, right? I'll say lists. Use square brackets, not parentheses or curly braces. Okay. So in looking at my list, I have 4 strings in my list. I have a string that says November 7th. I have a string called January 18th. I have a string called March 20th and a string that says September 8th. Now in here, November 7th is stored first. Computers start counting at what number?
0.
0. So this is index 0. This is index 1. This is index 2. And this is index 3. So if I were to print out birthdays, I'm printing out the entire list. I'll run my code. And I'll move this over here a little bit. Notice that all the birthdays show up over on the right. Move this down here. All the birthdays show up November 7th, January 18th, March 20th, September 8th. All right. So I create a list and I was able to print out the list. Let's say I want to change November 7th. Let's say I don't want people to know my daughter's birthday, right? And instead, I want to replace the first item in the list. Now, the first item is index 0. So I'm going to replace that first item with a new birthday. And instead, I'll replace it with what birthday? February 2nd. Is that your birthday, really? John's birthday. So check this out. So I had a list called birthdays, has four items in it, and I printed it out. Then I took the very first item, which was November 7th, and replaced it with February 2nd, and then reprinted it out again. Let me run it and show you what happens. Notice that the first one, it says November 7th, January 18th, March 20th, September 8th. Okay, I printed out these birthdays here. I then went and replaced that very first item with February 2nd. And if you look, when I printed it out, February 2nd shows up there. So you can replace different items in there. And those are lists. We've talked about lists before, but I want to talk about lists before talking about tuples because tuples are considered lists' cousins. They're similar, but different. And I'll explain it. Tuples use parentheses. Some of you were creating tuples in your project and not realizing it because you were looking at my project code and looking, saying, is that a parenthesis? Is that a square bracket? What is that? And you would put parentheses. And lists are different than tuples, and let me explain what that means. So let me create a tuple called Books of the Bible. Okay. Now, tuples cannot change. And so let me create a list. I don't know. I'll put a couple books of the Bible in here. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. I'll say Numbers, and I'll stop there. All right, first 4 books of the Bible. And then I'm going to print out books of the Bible. Now notice in this tuple, the difference between a list and tuple is lists use these square brackets and tuples use parentheses. When I print it out, see I have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Now, what is a tuple? Why would I use it instead of a list? Well, tuples are used when you do not want any item in there changed. You don't want any of the books of the Bible changed. How many books of the Bible are there? 66, right? If all of a sudden I looked in there and there's a book in there called The Book of Mike Capone, right? Would that be okay? No, that's not a book of the Bible. That's not in our canon. So watch this. If I look at this and I say, all right, well, you know, Mike's had this revelation that instead of the book of Genesis, there should be a book called the Book of Mike. Okay. And if I try replacing Genesis with Mike in the same way in the list, I replaced February 2nd. I replaced November 7th with February 2nd. If I try replacing this and I try printing it out, print out books of the Bible, and I run it, look what happens. I get an error. It doesn't let me replace the book of Genesis with the book of Mike. It says tuple object does not support item assignment, aka it is immutable. Lists are mutable, meaning they can mutate and change. Tuples are immutable, meaning they cannot change. If I create a list called the Apostles, or if I created a list called RPS choices for rock, paper, and scissors, can the choices rock, paper, scissors, can you add a fourth one in there? Would it still be rock, paper, scissors? No. So we will be using a tuple in creating rock, paper, scissors. You don't have to, but you should use one when you're creating a list of things that cannot change. Okay. Some of you used tuples accidentally in your project and then tried making changes to it. And it was like, wait, what's going on? We can't do this. So we have lists and tuples. And then we also have these things called dictionaries. Okay. And dictionaries are used, and they're pretty cool in Python. They allow you, instead of accessing an element in a list, rather than accessing it by a number, like, okay, birthdays, this is 0, this is 1 right here, this is 2, this is 3. Dictionaries let you name them. So let's, as an example, use like LeBron stats, right? And these are realistic stats. So if I wanted to create an item called points and assign 0 points, because it's very common LeBron doesn't score because he's not that good of a player. And then we had another item called assists, and he had 0 assists because that's common. And then we had another item called turnovers, and we assigned it 27 and said, these are LeBron James stats for today. Right? Rather than just putting 0027 in a list, I wouldn't be able to tell what's actually assigned to it. But dictionaries use curly braces, and that allows you to assign different items in your list. So for example here, if I wanted to print out LeBron stats, instead of saying index 0, I could say, how many points did he have? Because I've assigned it a specific value. Let me go ahead and take out the book of Mike, or else it won't run. But if I go ahead and run this, it says LeBron James points 0. If I wanted to print out how many turnovers LeBron James had and run it, it'll give me 27. Once again, instead of creating a list that just said 0027, you might look at that list and be like, wait, what does that list even mean? In dictionaries, you can assign a specific keyword, a specific key as well as a value. So you have points and the value is 0. Assists, value 0. Turnovers, value 27. All right. So 3 similar items, lists, tuples, and dictionaries are just ways of storing multiple, I guess, I wouldn't say lists, but a bunch of information and a bunch of data in one specific variable name. Okay, so from there, I'm going to go ahead and actually, rather than deleting it, I'm just going to put it inside of something called a block string, which just hides it right now. I'm going to push it all the way down here so we don't have to worry about it. So we just talked about tuples and we talked about dictionaries. I'm going to pass over advanced flow control because we're going to cover that in this example, but we're going to talk more about it throughout the year. This right here, number 5, says passing multiple arguments to a function. Okay, let's say I wanted to actually create a function here. I'll define a new function, and I want to call this add two numbers. Okay, creating a function. And the two parameters I'm going to pass it, I'll just name num1 and num2. When I get to the end here, I'll hit enter, and it automatically indents it for me. And I'll say total is assigned the value of num1 plus num2. And then at the very end of all this, I want to return back to the user whatever the total was. So let me explain what I just did. I create a function, I defined it, and I called it add two numbers. It's just what I decided to name it. I could name it anything I wanted. I then passed it two values, num1 and num2. When those values end up getting passed in, I'm going to add those two numbers together to create total, and then return that back to the user. So let's say I call that function add two numbers, and I pass it two values. Let's say I pass it 4 and 2. If I were to pass in this function 4 and 2 and adds those two numbers together, what should my answer be? If I'm adding 4 and 2, what should my answer be? It should be 6. What should happen is, if I pass in 4, 4 takes the place of num1. 2 takes the place of num2. It adds 4 plus 2, assigns it to a value called total, which is now 6, and then returns it. So when this prints out add two numbers for 2, it should print out 6. Let's test it and see what happens. It printed out 6. Sweet. Let's change it up. Let's say instead of passing it 4 and 2, maybe I passed it 94 and 723. Let's see what happens. Gives me 817. I was able to create this function. All right. Now, let's say I want to put this in a while loop, right? I'll say while true. I'll zoom in so you can see it. So I'll say while true, I'll ask the user a question, and I'll say enter a number. And I'll assign that a value, I don't know, I'll call it X. And then I'll ask a similar question, and I'll say enter another number, and I'll assign it Y. And then from there, I'm going to call the function add. Oh, sorry. I already wrote it, so I'll just backspace it. I'm going to print add two numbers, but instead of 94, I'm going to pass it X. And instead of 723, I'm going to pass it Y. And then I'm going to give the user an option. I'm going to ask a question. Maybe I'll ask again. Do you want to play again? And I'll say, do you want to play again? I'll then add a conditional. I'll say, if again is not equal to yes, then we will break out of this forever loop. All right, so let me just walk through what I did and then I'll run it. Okay, so first I create a function called add two numbers. Whenever numbers are passed in here, they're going to take the values num1 and num2. I'm going to add those two numbers together, assign them a variable called total, and then return the total back to the user. I then down here used it, and I create a forever loop, a while true, which runs forever until I break out of it. I ask the user enter a number. When they enter a number, I'm going to assign that value to X. I also need to cast it as an integer because if I don't, I won't get the right answer. In the same way right here, I'm going to cast these as integers. So it's going to store it as an integer. The same thing here. User types in another number, casts it as an integer, and stores it as Y. Then it takes X and puts it right here. It takes Y and puts it right here. And then X becomes num1 and Y becomes num2 because I'm running the add two numbers function. It goes and finds the add two numbers function, which is up here. It uses it, adds it together, and returns it back. Then asks, do you want to play again? Any answer other than yes, it breaks out. Because if you do want to play again, then it runs all over again. Let's run this and see my final program. Enter a number. 983. Enter another number. 465. Enter. 1448. Do you want to play again? Yes. Enter a number. 7. Enter another number. 1. The answer is 8. Do you want to play again? Yes. One more time. 9,842 and 8,881. Gives you 18,723. You want to play again? No. And it breaks out of it. So in walking through this, I actually went through numbers 5, 6, and 7 all with you. We were able to pass multiple arguments, X and Y. We were able to work with parameters in our function. And we were able to pass arguments twice via our loop that kept on going until we did not want to play again. Okay, and there was our code of what we actually wrote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines of code. Okay. So those are all the walkthrough topics. We've talked about random numbers already. We know that Python has a random number generator through the module called random. We'll talk more about simulations as well as we move through the AP curriculum. For the rock, paper, scissors project, check this out. I gave you some example of what your code could possibly look like. I'm going to go ahead and copy it. And go ahead and delete all that. And paste it in here. Let me show you what the project could look like. All right, rock, paper, scissors. Notice that I have a label across the top. We all know what labels are. We used it in our last project. We have 3 buttons, rock, paper, and scissors. And we also have 1 label across the bottom. So 2 labels and 3 buttons. All right, what do you want to pick? Rock, paper, or scissors? Rock. Tie. Rock ties rock. Rock, paper, scissors. Scissors. You win. Scissors beats paper. Where did paper come from? The computer picked it. Without looking at the code, how do you think the computer picked it? Using the random module. Check this out. I created a tuple, which is similar to a list, and I put rock in it. I put paper, and I put scissors. I also created a dictionary called stats, and I added wins losses, and ties. Okay. When the computer throws, so I said throw for like rock, paper, scissors, that's called your throw. Okay. You're going to have the computer pick a random choice between rock, paper, or scissors. And then the way you win rock, paper, scissors, rock can beat scissors, scissors can beat paper, and paper can beat rock. Check this out. Down here, notice that I created, perfect. This is perfect right here. I created a rock button, a paper button, and a scissors button. And then I created two labels. Notice I used the dot grid method, which is the same as a tic-tac-toe project, where I have the result label in row 0, and it spans 3 columns. So check this out. Let me zoom out. Notice that if you're looking in the top right corner, this result label is what I called it. It spans 3 columns. Columns move up and down. I then put the rock button all the way on the left, the paper button right next to it, and the scissors button on the right. I then, in the very bottom row, added my stats label. See that in line 44? And it spanned 3 columns. All right, it's rock, paper, scissors. Rock, tie, paper, I lost. Scissors, I won. Scissors, I lost. Paper. I couldn't lose in my last class. My gosh. Not a good record so far. 1, 4, and 3. Anyway, let me go and look at the project one more time. And I want to share a few things with you. There are some cool things. Rock, paper, scissors project right here. What are some other stats that I can add? These are some questions people asked, said, hey, like, what else can I add to my game? You can add winning percentage. You can say the record just from your last 10 throws. How many times rock won? Like, is there a higher chance of winning when you throw rock or paper or scissors? Can you create a point system? These are all just add-ons. You don't have to do that. But you want to create a rock, paper, scissors game that does the following. All right. You're encouraged to add on and be creative.